January 1968. American commanders assured the world the enemy was defeated, the war was being won. But as South Vietnam celebrated its New Year holiday, a massive, coordinated attack was prepared, a final, desperate gamble to overthrow the government and shatter American will. Today, we explore the shocking nationwide assault that redefined the Vietnam War. A military defeat for the Viet Cong that became a colossal political and psychological victory for Hanoi. This was the moment the war came home. This is the battle that changed everything. This is the Tet Offensive. At 3 a.m. on January 30th, 1968, as millions of South Vietnamese celebrated Tet Nguyen Dan, the Lunar New Year, the most important holiday in Vietnamese culture, the war came crashing into their homes. Over 80,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops launched simultaneous attacks on more than 100 cities, provincial capitals, district towns, and military installations across South Vietnam. It was the largest, most coordinated military operation of the entire Vietnam War. Within hours, the ancient imperial capital of Hue was in enemy hands. Downtown Saigon had become a battlefield. The U.S. Embassy compound, the symbol of American power in Vietnam, was under assault. The Tet Offensive was a military gamble of staggering audacity. It would fail in almost every tactical objective. The Viet Cong would be decimated, suffering casualties so severe they would never recover as a fighting force. And yet, strategically, Tet would accomplish what years of guerrilla warfare could not. It would shatter American public support for the war, destroy the credibility of the U.S. government, and set the United States irreversibly on the path to withdrawal. This is the story of how a military defeat became a political victory, and how a single month in 1968 changed the course of the war and American history. To understand the shock of Tet, we must first understand the illusion it shattered. By late 1967, the American public was being told the war was being won. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, returned to Washington in November and declared in a speech to the National Press Club that the enemy was weakening, that the U.S. was winning the war of attrition, and that the end is in sight. The metrics supported this narrative, or seemed to. Enemy body counts were climbing. The pacification program in the countryside was showing progress. North Vietnamese infiltration was supposedly declining. The U.S. and South Vietnamese forces controlled the cities and major population centers. Most importantly, the U.S. had weathered recent challenges. The prolonged siege at Khe Sanh Combat Base, which dominated headlines, was being portrayed as a defensive success, with American firepower crushing PAVN forces attempting to replicate Dien Bien Phu. The American public, weary of the war but trusting their military leadership, wanted to believe. And so many did. But while Westmoreland spoke of progress, and while American attention fixated on the remote base at Khe Sanh, something was building in the shadows, a plan so audacious, so unprecedented, that American intelligence would fail to see it until it was too late. The architect of the Tet Offensive was the North Vietnamese leadership, Le Duan, first secretary of the Communist Party, and the military command under General Vo Nguyen Giap. But the plan was forged in desperation as much as ambition. By late 1967, the Communist forces were indeed suffering. American firepower and search and destroy operations were taking a terrible toll. Viet Cong recruitment in the South was declining. The PAVN was being battered in conventional engagements. The Communists needed a game changer, a single, decisive blow that would alter the strategic calculus. The plan they devised was called the General Offensive, General Uprising, a coordinated, nationwide attack on urban centers designed to achieve three goals. First, inflict maximum psychological shock on the Americans and South Vietnamese by proving the enemy could strike anywhere, anytime. Second, destroy the credibility of the South Vietnamese government and demonstrate its inability to protect its own population. Third, and most critically, spark a general uprising. The communist leadership believed that the South Vietnamese people, inspired by the attacks, would rise up against the Saigon government and join the revolution. This last assumption, the belief in a spontaneous popular uprising, would prove catastrophically wrong, but it drove every decision that followed. The date chosen for the offensive was deeply symbolic. Tet Nguyen Dan, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year. Tet was sacred, a time when families reunited, ancestors were honored, and even wars traditionally paused. Both sides had observed informal ceasefires during Tet in previous years. Attacking during Tet was a calculated act of cultural transgression, a violation of tradition designed to maximize surprise and exploit the holiday, when South Vietnamese forces would be on reduced alert and many soldiers would be home on leave. It was brilliant, and it was ruthless. Throughout late 1967 and early January 1968, tens of thousands of Viet Cong fighters infiltrated the cities. They came disguised as peasants, as mourners in funeral processions, as holiday travelers. Weapons were smuggled in coffins, hidden in flower carts, buried in rice shipments. Safe houses were established. Attack plans were rehearsed, and American intelligence missed it. There were signals, intercepted communications, reports of unusual enemy movements, captured documents mentioning an upcoming offensive. But U.S. intelligence analysts, focused on conventional threats like the siege at Khe Sanh, failed to connect the dots. They were looking for the wrong kind of war. They expected conventional assaults on remote bases. They did not imagine the enemy would launch a coordinated urban offensive involving over 100 targets simultaneously. On the night of January 30th, 1968, as fireworks lit the sky to celebrate the Year of the Monkey, the war came to the cities. January 30th, 1968, 3 a.m. The Tet Offensive began with a thunderclap. In the pre-dawn darkness, coordinated attacks erupted across South Vietnam, from the demilitarized zone in the north to the Mekong Delta in the south. 36 of 44 provincial capitals, 64 district towns, 5 of 6 autonomous cities, and dozens of military installations came under assault simultaneously. The scale was staggering. Over 80,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops, many of them local guerrillas who had lived in or near the cities for years, attacked with rockets, mortars, satchel charges, and small arms. They struck police stations, government buildings, radio stations, airports, and military headquarters. And most shockingly, they struck Saigon, the heavily defended capital, home to over 3 million people, headquarters of the U.S. and South Vietnamese military commands, and the symbol of American commitment to South Vietnam. The most iconic attack, and the one that would dominate global headlines, was the assault on the U.S. Embassy compound. At 2:45 a.m., a 19-man Viet Cong sapper team blasted a hole in the outer wall of the embassy with a satchel charge and stormed the grounds. The embassy itself, a newly built, 6-story modernist structure, was supposed to be impregnable, a fortress in the heart of Saigon. Inside, a handful of U.S. Marine Guards and military police barricaded themselves in the main building and fought back. The battle raged for 6 hours in the embassy courtyard, a chaotic, close-range firefight under floodlights and flares. By dawn, all 19 Viet Cong attackers were dead. The Marines had held. The embassy had not been breached. But the damage was done. By morning, journalists and television cameras arrived to film the carnage. Bodies sprawled on the manicured lawn, blast craters in the walls, spent shell casings littering the courtyard. The American public, watching on their evening news, saw the enemy inside the U.S. Embassy compound. The building itself didn't matter. The image was devastating. If the embassy wasn't safe, nowhere was safe. Elsewhere in Saigon, the attacks were equally bold. A Viet Cong commando team assaulted Independence Palace, the residence and office of South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thieu. They were repelled by security forces, but not before breaching the outer gates. The national radio station was seized, though Viet Cong forces were unable to broadcast their prepared messages before being overrun. Tan Son Nhut Air Base, Saigon's main airport and a critical U.S. logistics hub, came under rocket and ground attack. Firefights raged on the runways. The initial hours were chaos. American and South Vietnamese forces, many on leave for the Tet holiday, scrambled to respond. Military police, rear echelon troops, anyone who could hold a rifle was thrown into the fight. U.S. commanders struggled to assess the situation. Reports flooded in from across the country. Hue was under attack, Da Nang, Nha Trang, Ca Nan, My Tho, every major city. Was this the main effort, or a diversion for something larger? The most shocking aspect was the sheer audacity. The Viet Cong were fighting in the open, on city streets, in broad daylight, engaging in sustained combat instead of their usual hit-and-run tactics. It was a complete departure from the guerrilla warfare that had defined the conflict. And it was being broadcast live. The Tet Offensive was the first war fought in the living rooms of America. Television networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, had correspondents and camera crews in Saigon. Within hours of the attacks, footage was being transmitted via satellite to American audiences. They saw American soldiers crouching behind vehicles in downtown Saigon, firing at unseen enemies. They saw South Vietnamese civilians fleeing in terror. They saw smoke rising from burning buildings in the capital city. And they saw one image that would become iconic and controversial. On February 1st, Associated Press photographer Eddie Adams captured a single moment. General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, chief of the South Vietnamese National Police, executing a captured Viet Cong prisoner, Nguyen Van Lem, with a pistol shot to the head on a Saigon street. The photograph was raw, immediate, and shocking. It was published on front pages worldwide. The film footage, broadcast on NBC, was even more visceral. The gun raised, the shot, the body crumpling. The context, that Lem was a Viet Cong officer suspected of murdering South Vietnamese families, was lost. What Americans saw was summary execution, brutal and unfiltered. It became a symbol of the war's moral ambiguity, of a conflict where the good guys were capable of horrifying acts. The image did more damage to American public support than any single military defeat. Within 48 to 72 hours, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces regained control of Saigon. The Viet Cong fighters, isolated and without reinforcements, were hunted down and killed or captured. The attacks on key installations had been repelled. By February 5th, Saigon was secure. The battle had been intense but brief. Across the country, a similar pattern emerged. Viet Cong forces seized initial objectives but could not hold them. American firepower, helicopter gunships, artillery, airstrikes, devastated the attackers. South Vietnamese forces, after recovering from the initial shock, fought tenaciously to retake their cities. Within 2 weeks, most urban areas were back under government control. The Viet Cong suffered catastrophic casualties. Estimates suggested over 45,000 killed, a generation of guerrilla fighters, many of them experienced leaders and cadres, wiped out in urban combat they were neither trained nor equipped for. Militarily, the Tet Offensive was failing. The general uprising had not materialized. The South Vietnamese people, by and large, did not join the revolution. The Saigon government had not collapsed. But in one city, the ancient imperial capital, the battle was just beginning. And it would last for 25 days, producing the longest, bloodiest, and most destructive single engagement of the Tet Offensive. The battle for Hue. Hue was different. The city, located in central Vietnam along the Perfume River, was Vietnam's cultural and spiritual heart, the seat of the Nguyen dynasty, home to the Imperial Citadel, a UNESCO heritage site of pagodas, palaces, and ancient walls. It was a city of scholars, poets, and tradition. On the morning of January 31, 1968, over 10,000 PAVN and Viet Cong troops attacked Hue simultaneously from multiple directions. Unlike the hit-and-run attacks in other cities, this was a planned occupation. The Communists intended to hold Hue, declare it a liberated city, and use it as a symbol of their strength. Within hours, they controlled most of the city. The citadel, a massive fortress surrounded by walls 20 feet thick, fell to PAVN forces who raised the National Liberation Front flag over its gates. South of the river, Communist forces seized government buildings, police stations, and entire neighborhoods. The initial response was slow. US and South Vietnamese commanders, focused on Saigon and other critical targets, underestimated the scale of the Hue assault. They believed it was another raid that would collapse within days. They were wrong. The PAVN had dug in, fortifying buildings, setting up machine gun nests, laying mines, and preparing for a siege. Retaking Hue would require brutal, methodical urban combat. The battle began in earnest on February 1st, when US Marines and South Vietnamese forces launched a counterattack. What followed was 25 days of some of the most intense urban warfare American forces had experienced since World War II. The fighting was house to house, room to room. Marines advanced block by block, clearing buildings with grenades, rifles, and flamethrowers. The PAVN fought from fortified positions, using the city's ancient architecture, thick stone walls and narrow alleys, to their advantage. The conditions were nightmarish. The weather turned, cold rain and fog reduced visibility to meters. Marines fought in soaking uniforms, their boots slipping in mud and rubble. Resupply was sporadic. Casualties mounted. The PAVN had stockpiled ammunition and supplies throughout the city. They fought from behind walls that absorbed rifle fire and shrugged off grenades. US forces, initially reluctant to use heavy weapons for fear of destroying the historic city, soon had no choice. Artillery pounded buildings suspected of harboring enemy troops. Naval gunfire from US ships offshore leveled entire blocks. Airstrikes, A-4 Skyhawks and F-4 Phantoms, dropped bombs and napalm on the citadel. Hue, one of the most beautiful cities in Vietnam, was being systematically destroyed. The battle for the citadel itself was the most difficult. South Vietnamese forces, particularly the elite 1st ARVN Division, fought with desperate courage to retake the ancient fortress. They advanced meter by meter through the palace grounds, clearing gardens, courtyards, and buildings defended by entrenched PAVN soldiers. U.S. Marine companies, Alpha 1/1, Golf 2/5, Fox 2/5, fought parallel battles south of the river, pushing toward the citadel's outer walls. The Marines took horrific casualties. Some companies were reduced to half strength. Platoons were led by sergeants because all the officers were dead or wounded. By late February, the tide had turned. PAVN forces, battered by weeks of combat and running low on ammunition, began to withdraw. On February 24th, South Vietnamese forces finally retook the Imperial Palace and lowered the Communist flag from the citadel. The battle for Hue was over. The cost was staggering. Over 400 U.S. and South Vietnamese soldiers were killed. Thousands were wounded. PAVN casualties were estimated at over 5,000 killed. The Communists had fought almost to the last man, refusing to surrender even when the battle was clearly lost. But the civilian toll was the most horrific. Over 5,000 civilians had died in the fighting, killed in crossfires, by artillery, in airstrikes, or buried in collapsed buildings. And then came the discovery of the mass graves. As South Vietnamese forces cleared the city, they found burial sites, shallow pits, some near the citadel, others in the countryside surrounding Hue. Inside were the bodies of thousands of civilians, government officials, teachers, priests, intellectuals, foreigners. They had been systematically executed by the Viet Cong during the occupation, shot, beaten to death, or buried alive. Many had their hands tied behind their backs. Some were found in groups of dozens, buried together. The Hue massacre was a calculated act of terror. The communists had brought death lists with them, targeting anyone associated with the South Vietnamese government, the Catholic Church, or foreign organizations. The massacre revealed the Tet Offensive's darkest truth. The general uprising had never been voluntary. The communists had planned to rule through terror, liquidating anyone who might resist their authority. The South Vietnamese people had not risen up to join the revolution, and the communists punished them for it. By late February 1968, the Tet Offensive had collapsed militarily. Across South Vietnam, Viet Cong forces had been decimated. PAVN units withdrew back to their sanctuaries in Laos and Cambodia. The cities were secure. The South Vietnamese government had not fallen. The communists had achieved none of their tactical objectives. They had failed to hold any city. They had failed to destroy the ARVN. And most critically, they had failed to spark the general uprising that was supposed to justify the entire operation. By every military metric, the Tet Offensive was a catastrophic defeat for the communists. Over 45,000 Viet Cong and PAVN troops were dead, losses so severe that the Viet Cong would never recover as an effective fighting force. The southern insurgency was broken. The PAVN would have to carry the war from that point forward. The Americans and South Vietnamese had won decisively. And yet, strategically, they had lost everything. The military victory was real. The statistics were undeniable. Enemy killed in action exceeded 45,000. Cities retaken. South Vietnamese government intact. The Viet Cong shattered as a fighting force. General Westmoreland declared it a great success, proof that American strategy was working. The American public didn't care. Because what they had seen on their television screens, the images of Saigon under attack, the U.S. Embassy besieged, the summary execution on a city street, the ruins of Hue, contradicted everything they had been told. Just weeks earlier, Westmoreland had assured them the enemy was weakening, that the end was in sight, that progress was being made. And then, suddenly, the enemy was everywhere. In the capital, in the ancient cities, on the embassy lawn. The military had won the battle, but the administration had lost the credibility war. The term that emerged to describe the disconnect between official statements and observable reality was the credibility gap, the chasm between what the Johnson administration said and what the American people believed. Tet shattered the last remnants of that credibility. On February 27, 1968, the most trusted man in America, CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite, returned from a personal visit to Vietnam and delivered an unprecedented editorial. Speaking directly to the camera, Cronkite told the American people that the war was mired in stalemate and could not be won militarily. President Johnson, watching the broadcast, reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." He was right. Public opinion, which had been slowly turning against the war, now collapsed. Polls showed a majority of Americans believed the war was a mistake. Protests intensified. The anti-war movement, once a fringe phenomenon, became mainstream. Within weeks, the political consequences became clear. General Westmoreland, the architect of U.S. strategy, the face of American optimism, was quietly recalled to Washington in March 1968 and reassigned to a desk job as Army Chief of Staff. It was a promotion in title, a demotion in reality. His replacement, General Creighton Abrams, would pursue a fundamentally different strategy, focusing on pacification, smaller operations, and Vietnamization, the gradual transfer of combat responsibility to South Vietnamese forces. But the most dramatic consequence came on March 31, 1968. President Lyndon Johnson addressed the nation on television. He announced a partial bombing halt over North Vietnam to encourage peace negotiations. And then, in a stunning conclusion, he declared, "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president." Johnson, a master politician who had won the presidency in a landslide in 1964, had been broken by the war. Tet had made his position untenable. He could not run for re-election while prosecuting an unpopular war that had lost the support of the American people. The Tet Offensive had claimed its most powerful casualty. The legacy of Tet is one of the great paradoxes of military history, a tactical defeat that became a strategic victory. The Communists suffered devastating losses. They failed to hold any cities. They failed to spark an uprising. They failed to destroy the South Vietnamese government. By traditional military standards, they had been crushed. But they had achieved something far more valuable. They had shattered the American will to continue. They had exposed the credibility gap. They had demonstrated that the enemy was far from defeated, that the war could not be won on the current trajectory, and that the costs, in lives, treasure, and national unity, were unsustainable. Tet marked the beginning of the end for American involvement in Vietnam. From that point forward, the question was not whether the U.S. would withdraw, but when and how. The Communists understood this. They had lost the battle but won the war. And in warfare, as in politics, perception is reality. Tactically, the Viet Cong and PAVN suffered a crushing military defeat, losing tens of thousands of their best fighters and failing to ignite the promised popular uprising. But the true battle was fought not on the streets of Hue or Saigon, but on the television screens of America. The shock of seeing nationwide attacks, coming immediately after repeated assurances that the enemy was on the ropes, shattered the credibility of the Johnson administration and the military command. The credibility gap became an unbridgeable canyon. Within weeks, General Westmoreland was recalled, and President Lyndon B. Johnson, defeated by the political fallout, announced he would not seek re-election. The Tet Offensive was the political pivot point of the war, setting the United States irrevocably on the path to withdrawal. If you want to understand the monumental struggles where perception becomes reality and politics outweighs military victory, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment below. We want to know, do you believe the U.S. media's coverage of the Tet Offensive accurately reflected the military outcome, or did it inadvertently hand Hanoi a strategic victory? Thanks for watching.